you're tuning into AWANI Tonight with me, Farhana Sheikh. The government has agreed to abolish the mandatory death penalty, and we dive deep into the issue of medicine shortage in Malaysia. That's coming up. The government has agreed to abolish the mandatory death penalty. De facto Law Minister Datuk Seri Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar said the capital punishment would be replaced by other types of punishment at the court's discretion. Following a cabinet meeting on June 8th, Wan Junaidi said the cabinet has agreed that further studies should be carried out for alternative sentences for 11 offences which carry the mandatory death penalty. This includes Section 39B of the Dangerous Drugs Act pertaining to drug trafficking. The government, he said, would also review other matters in the criminal justice system, such as pre-sentencing procedures, establishment of a sentencing council and a law commission, as well as developing sentencing guidelines and prison reforms. Crimes currently punishable by death in Malaysia include murder, drug trafficking, terrorism, kidnapping and possession of firearms. In August 2019, the Pakatan Harapan administration formed a special committee to review alternative punishments to the mandatory death penalty. The PH government, however, collapsed in February 2020 before the bill to abolish death penalty could even be tabled in the March meeting of Parliament that year. The government's decision to abolish the mandatory death penalty is a significant step towards a fairer criminal justice system. That's according to constitutional lawyer New Sin Yew, explaining how the new move will assist people on death rows, but with mitigating factors.
The current problem with the mandatory death penalty is that it removes all forms of discretion from the courts when it comes to sentencing. So as far as criminal justice is concerned, the courts are not able to take into account certain what we call mitigating factors. So for example, if a individual has very low IQ, 69 for example, as we saw in Nagendran's case, that person, despite being of low IQ, and courts would consider that as being a mitigating factor, is not able to take into account that as a mitigating factor and have to sentence somebody to death, that would now change. The criminal justice system would become more a fairer system. The sentences that are being met out would be more proportionate. Not everyone who has mitigating factors would be sentenced to death anymore. So what we have here, we are seeing the start of a fairer system, a more humane system that doesn't remove or doesn't tie the judge's hands.
The government will also review other reforms to the criminal justice system, including the establishment of a sentencing council and a law commission. Sin Yew said this would be necessary as the next step once the mandatory death penalty is abolished.
What will happen next, I think, is that there will be a sentencing council. They'll look into establishing a sentencing council, because once you abolish the mandatory death penalty, you need to look at what do you do with those who are currently sentenced to death. You need to replace it with an alternative punishment. So I suppose that sentencing council or committee, which I suspect will be helmed by judges, or its members would consist of federal court judges, ex-federal court judges perhaps. They will look into what new sentences to be imposed on those who are undergoing the death penalty. But of course, even before that, legislative change needs to happen. The law needs to be changed, and all the 11 mandatory death penalty offences, which I think 9 of them are in the penal code and 2 of them are in firearms related, that needs to be amended. And I think there will be a new law to deal with what do we do with those who are undergoing the death penalty at this moment, and those who have been sentenced under laws which carried the mandatory death penalty.
Implementing an export ban on food items will only address short-term shortage. Research fellow from University Putra Malaysia, Professor Datin Fatimah Muhammad Arshad says, in order to ensure long-term food security, the country must increase its production capacity in all dimensions.
Develop the industry from all dimensions, from input sector to production to marketing, distribution, aggregation, as well as market growth and connection, right? Because problems has been exposed under MCO where connection and linkage were cut off and production were affected by climate change and so on. So in order for the sector to remain sustainable and resiliency, all these subsectors have to be improved and rectified.
Therefore, Malaysia must beef up research and development strategies on agriculture and food production.
The latest term that they use is climate smart agriculture. I think 2 days ago, US has decided or has come up with an agenda to transform their food system to be climate smart agriculture, meaning everything is organic, bio-based, so that the production or the agriculture can withstand climate change shock in the future.
Solutions, she said, must be one that enhances production while sustaining natural resources.
Natural resources include water, land, the soil, as well as the environment, including the insects. Remember, in some countries, they are losing bees. So the moment you lose your bees, the insect, that will affect future production. So we don't want to use too much chemicals, so much so that we kill those insects that help nature to produce or to increase productivity. Yeah. So as I said, there's no quick fix to that. There is no shortcut. We have to do lots of research.
We'll go for a quick break. Stay with us.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
Bahmun semua padian, lihatlah AWANI Borneo jam 7 malam setiap hari, banyak berita-berita cerita kita ni hanya di Astro AWANI.
Welcome back. The world is experiencing a disruption to the global supply chain due to the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical crisis that has now affected medicine supplies. According to Azrul Muhammad Khalib, CEO of Galen Center for Health and Social Policy, this is not a time to downplay the seriousness of the issue, as it may worsen over time.
So what we're seeing actually is a reduced levels of stock for certain medicines used in the treatment of medical conditions like respiratory ailments such as flu and cough, as well as like paracetamol for fever. So this seems to be at the moment limited to private hospitals, GP clinics, and private pharmacies. To basically some extent, what we're seeing today was expected due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, because it's still not over yet. We are concerned right now is the classification of other drugs, which is seemingly being affected by the ripple effects from the geopolitical scenarios, such as the Russian-Ukraine armed conflict and the lockdowns that have occurred in major industrial and port cities in China. So what we're hearing right now, and this is anecdotal information from on people and patients is that drugs used to treat conditions such as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and even Parkinson's disease are limited in stock. So this has forced some people to cross state lines to look for their medication, and this is something that is very worrying. And we've already heard from, I think KJ just the other day, confirming that antibiotics are also something of short supply right now, and antibiotics are more likely than any other drug to be in shortage when it comes to consumption.
Therefore, preparing further medicine and pharmaceutical supply shortages must start now. Astro said while the geopolitical crisis and other problems affecting the global supply chain may be out of our hands, Malaysia can explore rationing supplies at home to ensure adequate stocks.
In the long run, we are looking at a possible disruption of between 6 months to even a year for certain types of medication and pharmaceutical products. So right now, what we need to be able to do is to start thinking long-term, perhaps even rationing some of the high-demand drugs. We certainly probably cannot afford anymore to give drugs like 1 month's worth given in one visit. And perhaps it needs to be rationed to maybe 2 weeks worth. And this is to avoid a situation where we run out of certain drugs that would cause doctors to prescribe suboptimal treatment. So we need to make sure that there's optimal treatment for the different diseases and that there's enough drug supply. And to ensure that happens, we need to ensure that we have enough drugs. So the government has probably got to already start thinking about rationing some of the drugs used for cardiovascular disease, hypertension, maybe even diabetes, looking at planning for disruptions to occur all the way up until the end of the year.
Continuing this discussion tonight on Consider This, we speak to our guests on the situation of medicine stocks in Malaysia and what can be done to ensure adequate supply amidst global disruptions. On to the international front, Ukraine's southern city of Mariupol is at risk of a major cholera outbreak. According to Britain's Defence Ministry, medical services there are at the risk of collapsing as Russia struggles to provide basic necessities to captured territories.
In a tweet today, Britain's Defence Ministry said it is also likely that the city of Kherson is facing a shortage of medicines. It added that Russia is not providing safe drinking water, telephone and internet services to Ukrainians in Russian-occupied territories. Last month, the WHO declared Mariupol under Russian control after weeks of siege and heavy bombardment. The ministry said a cholera outbreak would exacerbate the already collapsing healthcare system. Ukraine suffered a major cholera epidemic in 1995, with minor outbreaks since in cities including Mariupol.
Over in southern China, dozens were killed as heavy rains displaced millions and costing billions of yuan in losses. China is grappling with intensifying flood seasons fueled by climate change.
In Guangxi province, landslides killed at least 7 people, with 1 still missing as of yesterday. Over in Hunan, at least 17 people died and 4 missing. Meanwhile, over 2,700 houses have collapsed or suffered severe damage from floods and landslides, while over 90,000 hectares of crops have been destroyed. Last month, floods killed 8 people in Fujian, 5 in southwestern Yunnan, and 2 children were swept away by torrents in Guangxi. Chinese authorities are on high alert for this year's flood season, which started in June. Summer floods are common in China, but scientists warn the climate crisis would amplify extreme weather, making it deadlier and more frequent.
That's all we have for you on AWANI tonight. I'm Farhan Ashe. Thank you for watching.